Sephardic law and customs means the practice of Judaism as observed by the Sephardi and Mizrahi Jews, so far as it is peculiar to themselves and not shared with other Jewish groups such as the Ashkenazim.Sephardim do not constitute a separate denomination within Judaism, but rather a distinct cultural, juridical and philosophical tradition. Sephardim are primarily the descendants of Jews from the Iberian peninsula. They may be divided into the families that left in the expulsion of 1492 and those that remained as crypto-Jews and left in the following few centuries. In religious parlance, and by many in modern Israel, the term is used in a broader sense to include all Jews of Ottoman or other Asian and North African backgrounds, whether or not they have any historic link to Spain, though some prefer to distinguish between Sephardim proper and Mizrahi Jews. For the purposes of this article, there is no need to distinguish the two groups, as the religious practices are basically similar. Whether or not they are Spanish Jews, they are all Jews of the Spanish Rite. There are three reasons for this convergence which are explored in more detail below. Both groups follow general Jewish law without those customs specific to the Ashkenazi tradition. The Spanish Rite was an offshoot of the Babylonian Arabic family of Jewish rites and retained a family resemblance to the other rites of that family. Following the expulsion, the Spanish exiles took a leading role in the Jewish communities of Asia and Africa, who modified the rites to bring them still nearer to the Spanish Rite, which by then was regarded as the standard law. Jewish law is based on the Torah, as interpreted and supplemented by the Talmud. The Talmud in its final form dates from the Sasanian period and was the product of a number of colleges in Babylonia. The Geonic period. The two principal colleges, Sura and Pumbedita, survived well into the Islamic period. The presidents, known as Geonim, together with the exilic, were recognized by the Abbasid caliphs as the supreme authority of the Jews of the Arab world. The Geonim provided written answers to questions on Jewish law from around the world, which were published in collections of responsa and enjoyed high authority. The Geonim also produced handbooks such as the Halachot Pesukot by Yehudai Gaon and the Halachot Gedolit by Simeon Caera, Spain. The learning of the Geonim was transmitted through the scholars of Kairouan, notably Chananel ben Chashiel and Nissim Gaon, to Spain, where it was used by Isaac al-Farsi in his Sefer HaHalachot, which took the form of an edited and abridged Talmud. This in turn formed the basis for the Mishnah Torah of Maimonides. A feature of these early Tunisian and Spanish schools was a willingness to make use of the Jerusalem Talmud as well as the Babylonian. Developments in France and Germany were somewhat different. They too respected the rulings of the Geonim, but also had strong local customs of their own. The Tosafists did their best to explain the Talmud in a way consistent with these customs. A theory grew up that custom trumps law. This had some Talmudic support, but was not nearly so prominent in Arabic countries as it was in Europe. Special books on Ashkenazi custom were written, for example by Yaakov Molin. Further instances of Ashkenazi custom were contributed by the penitential manual of Eleazar of Worms and some additional stringencies on Shechita, formulated in Jacob Weil's Sefer Shechito Ubedico. The learning of the Tosafists, but not the literature on Ashkenazi customs as such, was imported into Spain by Asher ben Yechiel, a German-born scholar who became chief rabbi of Toledo and the author of the Hilchot HaRosh, an elaborate Talmudic commentary, which became the third of the great Spanish authorities after al-Farsi in Maimonides. A more popular resume, known as the Arbiturim, was written by his son, Jacob ben Asher, though he did not agree with his father on all points. The Tosafot were also used by the scholars of the Catalonian school, such as Nachmanides and Solomon Benedret, who were also noted for their interest in Kabbalah. For a while, Spain was divided between the schools. In Catalonia the rulings of Nachmanides and Benedret were accepted, in Castile those of the Asher family, and in Valencia those of Maimonides. After the expulsion, following the expulsion of the Jews from Spain, Jewish law was codified by Joseph Caro in his Bet Yosef, which took the form of a commentary on the Arbiturim and Shulchan Aruch, which presented the same results in the form of a practical abridgment. He consulted most of the authorities available to him, but generally arrived at a practical decision by following the majority among the three great Spanish authorities, Alfasi, Maimonides and Asher ben Yechiel, unless most of the other authorities were against them. He did not consciously intend to exclude non-Sephardi authorities, but considered that the Ashkenazi school, so far as it had anything to contribute on general Jewish law as opposed to purely Ashkenazi custom, was adequately represented by Asher. However, since Alfasi and Maimonides generally agree, the overall result was overwhelmingly Sephardi in flavor, though in a number of cases Caro set the result of this consensus aside and ruled in favor of the Catalonian school, some of whose opinions had Ashkenazi origins. The Bet Yosef is today accepted by Sephardim as the leading authority in Jewish law, subject to minor variants drawn from the rulings of later rabbis accepted in particular communities. The Polish Rabbi Moses Isserles, while acknowledging the merits of the Shulchan Aruch, felt that it did not do justice to Ashkenazi scholarship and practice. He accordingly composed a series of glosses setting out all respects in which Ashkenazi practice differs, and the composite work is today accepted as the leading work on Ashkenazi halakha. Isserles felt free to differ from Caro on particular points of law, but in principle he accepted Caro's view that the Sephardic practice set out in the Shulchan Aruch represents standard Jewish law, while the Ashkenazi practice is essentially a local custom. So far, then, it is meaningless to speak of Sephardic custom. All that is meant is Jewish law without the particular customs of the Ashkenazim. For this reason, the law accepted by other non-Ashkenazi communities, such as the Italian and Yemenite Jews, is basically similar to that of the Sephardim. There are of course customs peculiar to particular countries or communities within the Sephardic world, such as Syria and Morocco. An important body of customs grew up in the Kabbalistic circle of Isaac Luria and his followers in Safed, and many of these have spread to communities throughout the Sephardi world. This is discussed further in the liturgy section below. In some cases they are accepted by Greek and Turkish Sephardim and Mizrahi Jews, but not by Western communities such as the Spanish and Portuguese Jews. These are customs in the true sense. In the list of usages below they are distinguished by an L sign. Liturgy. Origins. For the outline and early history of the Jewish liturgy, see the articles on Siddur and Jewish services. At an early stage, a distinction was established between the Babylonian ritual and that used in Palestine, as these were the two main centers of religious authority. There is no complete text of the Palestinian rite, though some fragments have been found in the Cairo Geniza. Some scholars maintain that Ashkenazi Jews are inheritors of the religious traditions of the great Babylonian Jewish academies, and that Sephardi Jews are descendants of those who originally followed the Judean or Galilean Jewish religious traditions. Others, such as Sunnis, maintain precisely the opposite. To put the matter in into perspective, it must be emphasized that all Jewish liturgies in use in the world today are in substance Babylonian, with a small number of Palestinian usages surviving the process of standardization. In a list of differences preserved from the time of the Geonim, most of the usages recorded as Palestinian are now obsolete by the 12th century, as a result of the efforts of Babylonian leaders such as Yehudai Gaon and Pirkoi ben Baboy, the communities of Palestine, and diaspora communities such as Kairouan, which had historically followed Palestinian usages, had adopted Babylonian rulings in most respects, and Babylonian authority was accepted by Jews throughout the Arabic-speaking world. Early attempts at standardizing the liturgy which have been preserved include, in chronological order, those of Amram Gaon, Saadia Gaon, Shlomo ben Natan of Sijil-Masa, and Maimonides. All of these were based on the legal rulings of the Geonim but show a recognizable evolution towards the current Sephardi text. The liturgy in use in Visigothic Spain is likely to have belonged to a Palestinian-influenced European family, together with the Italian and Provençal, and more remotely the Old French and Ashkenazi rites. But as no liturgical materials from the Visigothic era survive, we cannot know for certain. From references in later treatises such as the Sefer HaManhig by Rabbi Abraham ben Nathan HaYahi, it appears that even at the later time the Spanish Rite preserved certain European peculiarities that have since been eliminated in order to conform to the rulings of the Geonim and the official texts based on them. The present Sephardic liturgy should therefore be regarded as the product of gradual convergence between the original local rite and the North African branch of the Babylonian Arabic family, as prevailing in Geonic times in Egypt and Morocco. Following the Reconquista, the specifically Spanish liturgy was commented on by David Abudiram, who was concerned to ensure conformity with the rulings of Halacha as understood by the authorities up to and including Ashab and Yehiel. Despite this convergence, there were distinctions between the liturgies of different parts of the Iberian Peninsula. For example, the Lisbon and Catalonian rites were somewhat different from the Castilian rite, which formed the basis of the later Sephardic tradition. The Catalonian rite was intermediate in character between the Castilian rite and that of Provence. Hatim Gastic classified the rites of Oran and Tunis in this group. Post-expulsion. After the expulsion from Spain, the Sephardim took the liturgy with them to countries throughout the Arab and Ottoman world, where they soon assumed positions of rabbinic and communal leadership. They formed their own communities, are often maintaining differences based on the places of origin in the Iberian Peninsula. In Salonika, for instance, there were more than 20 synagogues, each using the rite of a different locality in Spain or Portugal. In a process lasting from the 16th through the 19th century, the native Jewish communities of most Arab and Ottoman countries adapted the pre-existing liturgies, many of which already had a family resemblance with the Sephardic, to follow the Spanish rite in as many respects as possible. Some reasons for this are: the Spanish exiles were regarded as an elite and supplied many of the chief rabbis to the countries in which they settled, so that the Spanish rite tended to be favored over any previous native rite. The invention of printing meant that Siddurim were printed in bulk, usually in Italy, so that a congregation wanting books generally had to opt for a standard Sephardi or Ashkenazi text. This led to the obsolescence of many historic local rites, such as the Provençal rite. R. Joseph Caro's Shulianaruch presupposes a Castilian rite at every point, so that version of the Spanish rite had the prestige of being, according to the opinion of Moran, the Hakam Bashi of Constantinople was the constitutional head of all the Jews of the Ottoman Empire, further encouraging uniformity. The North Africans in particular were influenced by Greek and Turkish models of Jewish practice and cultural behavior. For this reason many of them to this day pray according to a rite known as Minhag. The influence of Isaac Luria's Kabbalah. See the next section. Lurianic Kabbalah. The most important theological, as opposed to practical, motive for harmonization was the Kabbalistic teachings of Isaac Luria and vital. Luria himself always maintained that it was the duty of every Jew to abide by his ancestral tradition, so that his prayers should reach the gate in heaven appropriate to his tribal identity. However, he devised a system of usages for his own followers, which were recorded by Vital in his Shara HaKavanot in the form of comments on the Venice edition of the Spanish and Portuguese prayer book. The theory then grew up that this composite Sephardic rite was of special spiritual potency and reached a 13th gate in heaven for those who did not know the tribe. Prayer in this form could therefore be offered in complete confidence by everyone. Further Kabbalistic embellishments were recorded in later rabbinic works such as the 18th century Yamim. The most elaborate version of these is contained in the Siddur published by the 18th century Yemenite Kabbalist Shalom Sharabi for the use of the Bet El Yeshiva in Jerusalem. This contains only a few lines of text on each page, the rest being filled with intricate meditations on the letter combinations in the prayers. Other scholars commented on the liturgy from both a halachic and a Kabbalistic perspective, including Azulai and Pelagi. The influence of the Lurianic Sephardic rite extended even to countries outside the Ottoman sphere of influence such as Iran, where there were no Spanish exiles. The main exceptions to this tendency were Yemen, where a conservative group called Baladi maintained their ancestral tradition based on the works of Maimonides, and the Spanish and Portuguese Jews of Western countries, who adopted a certain number of Kabbalistic usages piecemeal in the 17th century but later abandoned them because it was felt that the Lurianic Kabbalah had contributed to the Shabbatai Tzvi disaster. There were also Kabbalistic groups in the Ashkenazi world which adopted the Lurianic Sephardic ritual, on the theory of the 13th gate mentioned above. This accounts for the Nuzak Sephard and Nuzakari in use among the Hasidim, which is based on the Lurianic Sephardic text with some Ashkenazi variations. 19th century. For the 1840s on a series of prayer books was published in Livorno, including Tefillah ha-Odesh, Bet Obdan Zekor Abraham. These included notes on practice and the Kabbalistic additions to the prayers, but not the meditations of Shalom Sharabi. The books were designed for public congregational use. They quickly became standard in almost all Sephardic and Oriental communities, with any local variations being preserved only by oral tradition. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, many more Sephardic prayer books were published in Vienna. These were primarily aimed at the Judeo-Spanish communities of the Balkans, Greece and Turkey, and therefore had rubrics in Ladino, but also had a wider distribution. An important influence on Sephardic prayer and custom was the late 19th century Baghdadi rabbi known as the Ben Ishai, whose work of that name contained both halachic rulings and observations on Kabbalistic custom based on his correspondence with Eliyahu Mani of the Bet El Yeshiva. These rulings and observations form the basis of the Baghdadi rite. Both the text of the prayers and the accompanying usages differ in some respects from those of the Livorno editions. The rulings of the Ben Ishai have been accepted in several other Sephardic and Oriental communities, such as that of Jerba. Present day. In the Sephardic world today, in particular in Israel, there are many popular prayer books containing this Baghdadi rite, and this is what is currently known as Minhageh.HaMizrah. Other authorities, especially older rabbis from North Africa, reject these in favor of a more conservative Oriental Sephardic text is found in the 19th century Livorno editions, and the Shema Yemenite and Syrian rites belong to this group. Others again, following R. Ovadia Yosef, prefer a form shorn of some of the Kabbalistic additions and nearer to what would have been known to R. Joseph Caro, and seek to establish this as the standard Israeli Sephardi rite for use by all communities. The liturgy of the Spanish and Portuguese Jews differs from all these, as it represents an older form of the text, has far fewer Kabbalistic additions and reflects some Italian influence. The differences between all these groups, however, exist at the level of detailed wording. For example, the insertion or omission of a few extra passages. Structurally, all Sephardic rites are very similar. Instances of Sephardic usage. Sephardim do not put on tefillin during Ol Hamo They say only one blessing to cover the tefillin of the arm and the head, rather than one for each. They wind the tefillin strap anti-clockwise. The form of the knot and of the wrappings round the hand is also different from that of the Ashkenazim. Mizrahi are placed vertically rather than slanting, except amongst Spanish and Portuguese Jews in Western countries. In the Zitzi, each winding loops through the preceding one, and the pattern of windings between the knots is either 1-0-5-6-5 or 7-8-1-1-1-3. The script used in Torah scrolls, tefillin and mizrahi, is different from the Ashkenazic and nearer to the printed square characters. In many of the prayers, they preserve Mishnaic patterns of vocalization and have mostly not altered them to conform with the rules of Biblical Hebrew. Examples are Nakdishuk and Hagefen. The second blessing before the Shema begins, Ahavit in all services. In the summer months they use the words Morad Harali in the second blessing of the Middah. The Kiddusha of the morning service begins, Nakdishik Ve'ina Arisak, and the Kiddusha of Musaf begins, Keta Yitenu Elka. There are separate summer and winter forms for the Birkat HaShanim. There is no Birkat HaKohanim in Minna on any day except Yom Kippur. The last blessing of the Middah is Sim Shalom in all services. They are permitted to sit for Kaddish. Aden Olim has an extra stanza. In many communities the Torah scroll is kept in a tiq instead of a velvet mantle. They lift the Torah scroll and display it to the congregation before the Torah reading rather than after. Most Sephardim regard it as permissible to eat rice or beans on Passover. Sephardim only say blessings over the first and third cups of Passover wine, instead of over all four. The items on the Seder plate are arranged in a fixed hexagonal order. El Seliho said throughout the month of Elul. Sephardic Rishonim reject the customs of Tashlik and Kaparot, though they were reintroduced by the Lurianic school. Only one set of Hanukkah lights is lit in each household. The shamash is lit together with the other Hanukkah lights, instead of being used to light them. The laws of Shechita are in some respects stricter and in other respects less strict than those of Ashkenazim. Many Sephardim avoid eating fish with milk, as in Eastern Mediterranean countries this is widely considered to be unhealthy. Ashkenazim argue that this practice originated from a mistake in the Bet Yosef, and that the prohibition really concerned the eating of fish with meat.